Hey there, Stat200. This office hour we're going to be talking about gathering data. So gathering data incorporates a few important topics. First, types of samples, which we're going to be talking about in just a second. And two, we're going to have types of biases. Okay? So let's dive in with this first question here, and I'm going to be explaining different types of samples. So the question reads, which of the following is the best example of a population from which a cluster sample would be easier to obtain than a simple random sample? It says that, but it should say than. And we've got four options. First one is passengers who will be flying in the upcoming week on a certain airline. Then we have registered drivers in a certain state. Then employees of a large company. And finally, members of a national organization. So let's talk about what we're looking for here. So we're looking for a cluster sample, which is different from simple random sample in that a cluster sample usually has an easy way to subgroup the population so that that subgroup is representative of the whole population. Okay? So if we think of our population, here's our whole population right here. And a simple random sample, we'll do that in red. A simple random sample would be like saying, okay, well, we're just gonna randomly take people from all over this population, and in that way we'll get a representative sample. And that's great, that works just fine. But if we have a population that separates easily into groups like this, then a cluster sample would be if you select one of these subgroups that are easy to find, and then you do sampling just within that group. And sometimes you'll even just do a simple random sample within the cluster. Alright, so that's kind of the distinction. So cluster samples, just a quick aside, cluster samples are different from stratified samples in that in a cluster sample you only choose one or two groups, this one or maybe this one if you want, but it doesn't matter because each cluster should be representative of the population, right? More or less. A stratified sample would be if you have multiple groups, but it's important that you take each group into account. So you're going to actually sample from all of the groups in a stratified sample. An easy example of a stratified sample is, say you're at a high school, and here's the whole high school population, and then we have seniors, juniors, sophomore, and freshmen, right? So you have these four groups here, and you want to take an opinion poll on for example, what the graduation attire should be, right? Maybe that's not a good example because you might want to just poll the seniors for that. But something else that would concern the whole school, perhaps driving restrictions on the high school campus, for example. And you don't just want to sample only seniors or only juniors, etc. You don't want to just sample one class. You want to sample everybody. You want to make sure each class is represented equally. In that case, you would use a stratified random sample. You'd say, okay, I'm going to choose 10 seniors, 10 juniors, 10 sophomores, 10 freshmen, and that will be my sample. So that's a stratified sample. A cluster sample, each cluster is representative of the whole population. So in a high school, only the seniors would not be representative of the whole high school, right? Because not every student is a senior. So in this instance, a cluster sample, each group is representative of the whole population. So there's my explanation of the different types of sampling we're going to be talking about. Let's read these again. Let's read our options again. So let's start from the bottom. Members of a national organization. Well, are there easy ways to get a cluster sample from a national organization? Maybe. You don't want to go regionally, right? If you have a national organization, you don't want to just poll people in Florida, for example. because that's probably not representative of everybody. It's not going to accurately represent people's opinions who live in California or people who live in New York, for example. And there's probably not an easy way for this one to get a cluster sample. Let's move up. Employees of a large company. Again, no real easy way to cluster them together so that each cluster is representative. I mean, if you go by a department, well, if you're looking at the HR department, that probably doesn't represent the engineering department, right? Because the people who go into HR and people who are going to engineering may not necessarily be the same. May not have the same opinions. So there's no easy way to classify, put people in clusters like that. You could try also management levels, but again, managers are not the same as employees. It's not quite the same level, How about registered drivers in a certain state? The only thing you could really find out from that is where they live and then certain physical characteristics, right? So again, probably not easy to get a representative sample because you don't want to go by region because different regions can be different from other regions, right? You don't want to go by age because younger people and older people may have different opinions. You don't want to go by height. Shorter people and taller people. First off, men tend to be taller, and so you might get a more masculine opinion than a more feminine opinion if you only sampled shorter people. So in this case too, there's not really an easy way. And this is the one that is, I think, the easiest. You're flying in the upcoming week on a certain airline. So say Southwest Airlines wants to poll people who are flying with them. Well, what's an easy way for them to obtain cluster samples? You just take people on certain flights, right? I mean, you don't have to get every single flight, but say you get flights from around the country, going to different destinations. So you have maybe, I don't know, you just pick 10 flights at random, and then within those flights, you sample people. And that would be very easy because you'd expect that maybe there's some differences in, who's flying from which destination, from which origin to which destination, sure. But that's why you're just going to take multiple flights. And those flights come in nice little clusters, You have people of all different ages, races, gender, all that. It's all mixed up in every plane, right? So it's nice and easy to get a representative sample from a few clusters, right? Pick a few flights, you sample those flights, and you have a really good idea of what's going on in that airline. Okay? So that's why this is the best option. Now, I'm not saying that one doesn't come with problems, but it's just the easiest. You already have people coming in packets, little groups of people, and they're more or less going to be representative as long as you do a few flights, not just, one flight. See what I mean? So maybe to make my diagram a little more clear, a cluster sample you would do maybe just these two groups here. You'd be like, okay, we've got it pretty well covered. We sample from this one, we sample from this one. We're going to say we have a generally good idea of the whole population. Okay? So that's cluster sampling. Moving on. A television news program asks viewers to log onto their website and vote on a different issue each day. The website allows visitors to select one of two choices and submit a vote. The results of the poll are reported the next day on the news program. The population to which the results of these polls can be extended is... Right. Now we have four options. All viewers of the news program, all visitors to the website, all viewers who have voted in any of the polls, or only viewers who voted in that specific poll. All right. So we talk a little bit about this in the lesson notes. This can be called a convenience sample or a hazard sample because the program is simply asking people to participate. So it's kind of it's a volunteer sample. People can elect to participate or not. If they don't think that they're that interested, they can just be like, no big deal. So only people who are interested in that specific topic are going to be motivated enough to go online to their website and submit their vote. Right? People who are rather apathetic about a topic probably won't have the same opinions as people who are really, really, really excited about it. Right? So let's think about these piecewise. All viewers in the news program, you definitely can't extend that sample to all viewers of the news program, right? Like I said, you have some people who are kind of apathetic about a certain topic. You have a different issue. So one day, say they're talking about, I don't know, dog pet regulations in an area, right? And you think, oh, okay, pet regulations, great. But I don't have a pet, so I don't really care. So you might get a lot of people who own pets who come in and they're responding to the polls. But that's not all viewers of the news program, right? So that one's definitely not right. Letter B, all visitors to the website. Again, they may not have seen the news program. They may be apathetic and are just like, you know what? I don't really care. I'm not going to vote in this poll. Again, not going to work out. All viewers who have voted in any of the polls. Now keep in mind it says voting on a different issue each day. So let's say one day it's economically related and the next day it's pet related. You can't necessarily, the people who are really interested in economic stuff, I'm sure there's some crossover, people who own pets and are really passionate about their pets, but they're not going to be the same population. You have all these economically minded people and then you have all these pet lovers. There are some overlaps, but that's not the same population. And so the answer is only viewers who have voted in that specific poll. And you might think, well, why would we only want to be able to extend the sample only to its sample? You can't infer anything about a larger population. You can only extend these results to that sample by itself. Why would you want to do that? Well, first off, it's cheap and easy, right? So the television news program only has to set up a website, a few lines of code, boom, it's on there. It doesn't cost them anything else to run it. Data gets automatically logged for them. It's easy. So of course they want to do polls like this. But unfortunately, these polls aren't really telling us much. They only tell us about people who are voting in that poll. That's it. You can't extend that to a larger population. So that's why this type of sample is not looked upon very fondly in the statistics community, because it doesn't tell you much. Okay? Next one. A magazine printed a survey in its monthly issue and asked readers to fill it out and send it in. Over 1,000 readers did so. This type of sample is called a what? Well, this is a lot like this one up here, right? They printed a survey in its monthly issue and asked readers, did not assign them, did not find them. They just asked readers to fill it out and send it in. Over 1,000 readers did so. The type of sample is called a what? Well, it's not a cluster sample, right? We talked about cluster sampling before. It's not a stratified sample. It's not a simple random sample. Don't be fooled. It's a self-selected sample because people can choose whether or not to fill out this little survey and send it in. So that's another term for this type of poll up here. It's a self-selected sample. If people want to be in it, they can be. And if they don't have to be. And unfortunately, those types of polls just don't apply to large populations. Okay? So this one is a self-selected sample. Let's move on. Alright. Olivia wants to learn a foreign language. To get an idea of how satisfied other students were after taking a foreign language course, she decides to take a simple random sample of 20 students. Oh, I'm sorry, not a simple random sample. She decides to take a random sample of 20 students. If Olivia randomly selects 20 students among all students taking a foreign language class that year, the sampling method is a... Oh, well, there you go, I gave it away. So, imagine, you've got... Here's everybody, here's a box containing all the people who take foreign language classes. And then you can break that box into different layers, right? So you can say here's French, here's German, what else could there be? Spanish, of course, and Portuguese, let's say. Right, you've got these 4 groups, people who are taking this. You may also have, for example, different grade levels. So you might have senior, junior, sophomore, and freshman. You got all these different layers, all these different groups. What Olivia is doing is she's just going to randomly select 20 people. So she's just going to go la 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 la. Right? So she picks out 20 people from everybody. She's not breaking it down into smaller groups at all. So she's definitely not doing a cluster sample, right? She's not doing that. She's not doing a stratified sample because she's not taking any of these groups into account. She's not doing a systematic sample. So a systematic sample would be like going to every class roster and sampling every 10th person on that roster. That would be a systematic sample. Systematic samples are kind of structured like that. You just say, you find a list and then you select every X number person on that list. Know what I mean? So what she's actually doing is a simple random sample like I originally read in the question. It's a simple random sample because she's not taking any of these things into account. Now, if it had said, Olivia is going to sample 4 people or 5 people from each different language, 5 people from French, 5 from German, 5 from Spanish, and 5 from Portuguese, that would be a stratified sample, right? Or say she's going to sample 20 people randomly from the nearest apartment building, or 2 nearest apartment buildings, or 2 random apartment buildings. You wouldn't say, oh, well, that apartment building has more of any one of these. That would be more of a cluster sample. And then, like I said before, if she had a list of names and she just was systematic about how she was going to choose people, that's a systematic sample. Let's move on. There are 5 cities in a politician's district, but redistricting has been proposed for the state. The politician would like to know which city he should try to remove from his district. He plans to conduct a survey to find out his approval rating. Which of the following sampling plans would be the most useful for his purposes? Alright, here's this guy's district. He's got a district that looks like this. It's a very conveniently shaped district in order to get 5 cities, right? So he wants to know which city he should remove from his district. This, by the way, is called gerrymandering. It's a very bad thing. So he's looking at all these cities, and he wants to know about all of them. So he doesn't just want to know about this city and this city and this city. He wants to know about all 5 cities and wants to know his approval rating in each of them. So he could take a simple random sample across his district. He could do that, just every once in a while, just random person, right? But the problem with that is that may not accurately represent each district equally. It may not equally represent every district. So he doesn't want to do that because he wants to make sure he gets a good look at each district. He doesn't want to do a cluster sample because a cluster sample would be like, okay, well, I think this one's representative of the whole population. I'm just going to do that one and maybe this one. In a cluster sample, you don't look at all the groups, right? So, as you may have gathered by the fact that there are 2 options, you've got a stratified sample with political parties as a strata and stratified sample with the 5 cities as the strata. So, here's the 5 cities as a strata. Political parties would be, he'd poll Republicans, Democrats, and Independents equally. But that's not really what he wants to know. He's not trying to find out how Republicans or Democrats are supporting him. He wants to know how he's doing in each of his cities. So clearly what he wants to do is take a stratified sample with the 5 cities as the strata. Does that make sense? Because in that way, he will get an equally weighted sample from each of those 5 cities. All right. And that is all we have. I'm guessing bias is going to be a different lesson, because I thought it was in this one. But maybe it's next lesson. So keep in mind, we learned about simple random sample, stratified sample, cluster sample, and systematic sample. And if you need any help, if you'd like any further examples, please don't hesitate to email me. Have a good week.